Hello and thanks for joining me. Today I'd like to do a quick chat on Lincoln and the Bardo by George Saunders. You can tell I'm not in my usual location. I'm actually in a park next to Oak Hill Cemetery in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. The Oak Hill Cemetery is the setting for most of the action in Lincoln and the Bardo. And so I just thought I would pop down here. I was actually planning on doing the video in the cemetery itself, but they don't allow filming, I learned. So wasn't able to film in there, but there's a park right next to the cemetery. So I decided to come in here and do the filming. I found this big old tree, and I thought this tree stood a good chance of having been standing here as Lincoln. There's R streets right there. And in the book, at one point, Lincoln rides his pony down R Street as he's leaving one of his nightly visitations to the Oak Hill Cemetery. But yeah, Lincoln and the Bardo by George Saunders. This book was just published earlier this year. This is on as I'm doing this video, it's on the short list for the Man Booker Prize. And so I had heard about it, obviously around that. Around the prize mainly, but I had heard about it actually before that because people have been reading it and I've been hearing about, really good stuff about it. So I decided to go ahead and get it read. And wow, what a wonderful book. What it's about is, the Civil War is raging. It's 1862. President Lincoln is the president. He and his wife Mary are giving a sort of an obligatory party at the White House, and his son Willie has taken ill with fever after going out and ridden on this pony during bad weather, and so has caught this fever and is not doing too well. But they decide to go ahead and proceed with the party because it was such a big state kind of thing. Big party. The party's described and is pretty awesome, and so they decide to go ahead and proceed with the party. But ultimately, later on, shortly thereafter, Willie does actually die, and he is interred here right next door at Oak Hill Cemetery in a crypt there. And so President Lincoln is, of course, distraught, and this is historical. It actually happened, rather, and so President Lincoln made a couple of night visits out here to the cemetery to visit the deceased Willie. And what the story mainly involves, though, are spirits in the Bardo. But a Bardo is a transition period. It's a transition area in, I think, Tibetan Buddhism, where deceased people are in this sort of limbo where they're not alive, but they're also haven't moved on to their next stage yet, right? So the spirits here, the spirits in Oak Hill that Willie encounters want to stay there. They're sort of tied to life in one reason or another. For one reason or another, and that's sort of how the story progresses. So the story, my thoughts about it. I don't want to give much else away about it because it would really. I don't want to diminish the experience of reading it in any way. One thing that's sort of unusual about the way the book is written is that it's told. The narrator is a series of observers, so it's told through other people's observations. So, like for example. About the party that I mentioned, the party at the White House, this is told by letters and books and things that newspaper journalists and things that wrote about it at the time. And so and the same thing goes with Willie and how he reacted, or how President Lincoln reacted to Willie, and this type of thing is all told by different biographers, different letters, so even like Doris Kearns Goodwin is mentioned at one point, a quote from one of her books. So that sounds like it would be really hard to follow, but it's actually really not. And that's that's pertaining to the living people. The dead, they tell each other stories, more or less. So they one will tell the story of another. Some of them know each other quite well. Some have been there lingering in the cemetery for quite some time. But I thought that was an interesting way of storytelling, and it was really, really effective the way it worked. It really, I think, felt like, as far as the disembodiment of the spirits and such, really got a sense of that. It really felt real. There's a lot of them. I've heard things about the audio version of this book. It has a lot of voice actors, and some of them fairly famous and well-known actors, I think, that I could see that, because there's just a sort of a cacophony of voices. They all want something. They all want to tell their story because they won't accept that they're dead. So that's one thing going into the book that it took me a bit to realize what they were talking about when they say sick. So the dead refer to being dead as being sick because they don't ever want to acknowledge that they're dead. And their coffin is called the sick box. So, once I realized kind of what that was, then, I got it, and they don't ever refer to the land of the living. They refer to it as that other place. So they don't, they're scared to, or they don't want to acknowledge, they refuse to acknowledge, actually, that they are dead, and they've forgotten a lot about their lives. They focus on one thing, whatever it is that's got them caught, that's sort of what they focus on. If that was a lost love or some other sort of trauma, or one of them was a suicide that wanted to back out at the last minute but then wasn't able to. We have three main characters that tell us, the main story, and one of them was a sort of a middle-aged man who had found love later in life, a reverend, and then this young suicide. There was a gay guy who committed suicide over a lost, I guess, love, and plus being gay in the 19th century couldn't have been that easy. So, but the characters are just wonderful. It's sort of like Dante's Inferno in that they're sort of on a never-ending, they repeat the same thing over and over and over again, except in Dante's Inferno, I think the souls were there because that's where they'd been put as punishment. But here, they're in this limbo, they're in the Bardo because they're unable to move on. They're keeping themselves there. There are periodically angels, that appear, that I won't talk about too much, I guess, because I don't want to give too much away. But it's just very well done as far as putting us in the Bardo with these spirits and with Willie, right? Because Willie's there. President Lincoln does come to visit him. Of course, there's kind of a gulf between President Lincoln, who's a living person, and Willie and the rest of the spirits who are not. But it's really quite well done, and it's quite a beautiful meditation on life because, we can learn a lot about life through the dead, right? Through death. And this is really the whole really theme of this book. There's a beautiful quote that I thought I would read. It is from President Lincoln grieving for Willie. And he's thinking, this is in his thoughts only, I was in error when I saw him as fixed and stable, and I thought I would have him forever. He was never fixed nor stable, but always just a passing, temporary energy burst. Then it skips for a couple of paragraphs and it says, two passing temporarinesses developed feelings for one another. Two puffs of smoke became mutually fond. I mistook him for a solidity, and now must pay. I am not stable, and Mary's not stable, and the very buildings and monuments here are not stable, and the greater city not stable, and the wide world not stable. All are altering in every instant. I just thought that was beautiful. Some of it's very funny, some of it's very somber, like this quote, sort of meditation on death, and but a lot of it's very funny. And some of it's very beautiful, and actually brought tears. I didn't actually cry, but brought tears to my eyes. Parts of it, just very moving about life and what the characters, mostly the President Lincoln, as well as many of the undead, or many of the dead. They're not undead. Many of the dead, experience and sort of the insights that they uncover through this whole process. So. Beautiful book, so well done. So glad I read it. I'm glad I didn't wait. I almost put this off to read until next year, and I'm so glad that I went ahead and did get it read. So yeah, let me just talk a bit. I think I'll close the chat with that. I don't want to say too much else about it because, like I said, I think it's something that's best experienced because it's really hard to explain the interaction of the spirits with each other and how it's told in these sort of little short, very unusual kind of way. But it really worked for me. For me, it really worked. All right, so let me just show you. I did take a picture at the entrance of the cemetery. There's the... I did manage to get that. That was allowed, so I took a picture there. But yeah, what I'm currently reading is, or what I'm about to read is, my next read is going to be Hard to Be a God by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. I'm going to do a buddy read with Richardson Reads. For this is Soviet-era science fiction, 1964, published originally in Russian. So I'm looking forward to this a lot. I had read Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers last year and really liked it, and a lot of people commented on that video and have messaged me since recommending that I read Hard to Be a God. So I'm really glad to be able to get to that, as well as it's going to be fun to do this as a buddy read with Richardson Reads. And then while, Richardson Reads and I haven't started Hard to Be a God yet, but we do plan to start in the next few days. But in the meantime, I've decided to read Washington, The Making of the American Capitol. This is a nonfiction work about, the building of Washington and actually reading Lincoln and the Bardo. This is a book that I've had for quite some time and have not read, but reading Lincoln and the Bardo really put me in the mood to read something else about Washington, and so I thought it'd be a good time to read a little bit about the building of the city of Washington. So I also have an opera coming up tonight. I'm going to see Samson and Dalilah by Camille Saint-Saëns, and I will have an opera chat about that coming up very soon, probably in the next day or two. So until then, take care. Bye.